Conversations with Nicole. Conversations with Nicole. Let's talk about it. Tell me all about it. I'm here. I want to know what's on your mind. Ooh, the world needs to hear from you, and I'm so glad to have a conversation to reach the nation. And it's all about you. We'll help each other to discover innovative ways to positively change the world. Let's talk about, let's talk about, let's talk about conversations with Nicole.
Greetings. Welcome to Conversations with Nicole. I am Nicole Everett, your host. Conversations with Nicole is a talk show based here in Tallahassee, Florida, focused on connecting the community through conversations. And today is what I call Wellness Wednesday. Wellness Wednesday, which is an opportunity for you, me, and my guests to have a conversation. And so today we are talking about activists and anxiety. And we're calling it a guarded secret. We're calling it a guarded secret. So my special guest, Dr. Mike Johnson, who is based in Arizona, will be joining me very shortly. But before I introduce him and bring him on the platform with me, I gotta hear from you. I want to know where you are tuning in from. So if you will, in the comments, put your city and state so we can give you a shout out. This is an interactive live, so we expect to hear from you. We want to hear your comments. We want to read your questions. And this is a safe space for us to communicate with one another. We have been focused on Black and Brown mental health since November of last year, trying to eliminate the stigma around mental health and mental illness, and encouraging folks to connect with a counselor, a therapist, and get their checkup from the neck up. We need to take mental health as serious as we take physical health. So I see some of you chiming in. Miss Princess, who I actually just saw at Working Class Wednesday, thank you for being on. She's right here in Tallahassee. Greetings, Cynthia, out of Atlanta. Thank you for being here. Miss Lynette, one of our faithful viewers, she's right here in Tally. Greetings. And Miss Carla, good to see you tuning in from Miami. Thank you for being here. Miss Marion, also from Miami. So it looks like Miami and Tallahassee are in the house tonight. I appreciate that. So again, we are talking activists and anxiety, a guarded secret. I see you, Lisa Love, here in Tally. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate that. So tag a friend, tag your activist friends and family members. Let them know they need to be on here. When I was having my conversation with Dr. Mike about some of the work that he's done, he mentioned doing some work with activists. I thought, that's pretty interesting, because I know when I think of activists, I think of them as, having it all together, whatever their talking points are, what have you. But, when he shared that they have some issues as well with anxiety, with stress and things of that nature, I was like, that would be worthy of diving a little deeper into. So we are going to do that in just a moment. Let me pause. Hey there, LaTanya, tuning in from Georgia. Thank you for being here. So again, this is an interactive live, so we definitely want to invite you to comment and insert your questions in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit of my guest's bio. Dr. Mike Johnson is a psychologist who has been practicing for over 20 years. Born in Washington, D.C., to a single-parent household, he grew up around persons from a variety of class, sexual, racial, and gender identities, while he and his mother lived in D.C., Maryland, and in Georgia. He has arrived at his career through an indirect route, and we will ask him a little bit more about that a little later. But I'm going to just just like kind of fast forward, he graduated from Rutgers University with a bachelor's in physics and a master's in counseling psychology. In 2000, he graduated with his PhD in counseling psychology from Penn State and arrived in Arizona to work at Arizona State University's Counseling Services Center. He began his full-time practice in 2006, where he works with adults, providing individual virtual therapy for issues such as anxiety, grief, depression, men's issues, trauma and abuse, and relationship difficulties. He has been trained in a variety of therapeutic approaches such as brain spotting, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Say that fast 3 times, which is EMDR, which we have talked about on the show a little bit. We've had some other clinicians on that have that type of certification. Somatic attachment techniques and compassion focused therapy, as well as mindfulness based cognitive behavioral therapy. So he's got a lot of therapeutic approaches in his toolbox. He regularly engages in personal development activities such as attending workshops, therapy, participating in men's groups, journaling, and meditation. So help me welcome Dr. Michael Johnson, who I call Dr. Mike. Welcome, Dr. Mike.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Wow.
So I met you on Instagram, and it was I who reached out to you because one of the things that I say is finding a Black male therapist or counselor or psychologist, for that matter, is like finding a needle in a haystack. You all are like unicorns.
Yes,
right.
We're unicorns of the unicorns. I mean,
you are unicorns of the unicorns. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I seek you all out because I think Black men and boys in particular really need to hear from you all. And so I'm so just grateful that you have agreed to join us tonight. But before we dive in, I got to tell the folks, who is Dr. Mike? Not what you do, but who is Dr. Mike?
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for the introduction first, and I'm very happy to be here. In terms of a little bit more about me, I am a lover of pets. I have 2 dogs and a cat. As I was telling you earlier, the one dog who's a little over a year old, she decided to chew up the TV remote. So I'm a little, still a little hot about that. So I don't know. We'll see what happens after we leave here. I'm like I said, I'm still hoping she makes it to year 2. But it's days like this that become a little challenging with having pets. I also I like doing a lot of outdoor activities, hiking. I play softball a couple days a week. It's like a co-ed league. And every now and then I'll do some camping. But I definitely enjoy being out like on a beach or just outside in nice weather, enjoying nature. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, very good. Now, you in your bio, it was mentioned that you got your undergrad in physics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the roundabout way that you got to being a counselor therapist, what was the inspiration behind that?
I think the inspiration started with I didn't want to be a physicist.
Okay.
Pretty much. I didn't want to do engineering, which is where I started, and ended up graduating with degree in physics because I just accumulated enough credits. During that time, I was very active. I was a student activist on campus, and I was active in political organizations as well as programmatic organizations. And for me, those were turning points in terms of my development and who I was becoming and what I saw myself doing in my life. And I just couldn't see myself kind of working with devices and computers and things like that. It just there wasn't a passion there as much as I thought. There's an interest, but yeah, not a passion. So I was fortunate to be at a university where, I mean, we had some amazing people come through there. We had, if you remember, Amiri Baraka, poet and activist. He taught there for a period of time. Dr. Ivan Van Sertima was sort of I forgot. He was in the Department of Africana Studies there, and he's written a lot of books, kind of challenging notions of so who arrived at the shores of America, and so just being around those persons and many others kind of that were outside of engineering, outside of technical fields, that just really inspired me to want to do something that involved helping people, and specifically doing what I can in terms of helping us adapt to this culture, this climate, but also try and pursue some like avenues of Black liberation in the various forms that can come in, as well as helping us to develop who we want to be psychologically, as well as culturally. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Okay, good deal, good deal. All right, well, before we also just kind of jump into the topic, I have to read my disclaimer since I have a licensed professional on here, and that is that all topics, past, present, and future, on Conversations with Nicole are for informational purposes only. They are not to be used as a diagnosis for treatment or an answer to any personal issue related to the topic being discussed before, during, or after the program. So that's my disclaimer, and I'm sticking with it. All right. So you were activist yourself, yes?
Yeah.
So tell me kind of and not to generalize, but I'm going to generalize. When we think of activists, what are some of the characteristics that we often see or hear? And I'll start off by saying when I think of activists, I think of people that are very passionate about whatever it is they are championing. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. We're talking about people who they feel a sense of passion for a particular cause. It's very personal to them. Activists certainly vary in terms of their roles. You have folks who are out in front, kind of leading protests. You have persons who they may engage or lead kind of letter writing campaigns. But the idea is that there are a variety of different roles that activists can take, and but definitely, especially when it comes to Black activists, I'm sure we all have our pictures in our heads, between the Stokely Carmichaels and of course Martin Luther Kings and Fannie Lou Hamers, but just kind of all the persons we associate with the civil rights movement, Black Power movement, and all the way into, of course, present day through Black Lives Matter. But yeah, the idea is that usually we think of them as like you said, people who have it together, and essentially we don't have to worry about them. We don't have to be concerned about them. And, unfortunately, that's just not true.
Right.
That is not accurate.
So I'm gonna pause right here and seek to get our viewers involved. So, how many of you have activists in your lives? If you know of a friend or a family member that is on the front line championing a particular cause and is vocal about it in a in kind of an engaging type of way. So just give me a raise your hand or thumbs up or church finger or something like that. Let us know. Let us know. We want to hear from you. How many? Or maybe you're an activist yourself. Let us know if that's you. Let us know. We want to know. You know, with activists, like you said, it's typically they're passionate. Typically, whatever that issue is very personal to them. And like you said, we kind of feel like, or I think our thoughts are that they have it all together and that they, basically don't have any problems, right? Because they have the confidence to, to express themselves about whatever that thing is that they are championing. But, a part of why we are, having this conversation is because our thoughts about it in terms of their having it all together couldn't be farther away from the truth, right?
Right.
Because
Exactly.
they are human beings just like we are.
They are.
with
They are.
with flaws, with insecurities, with you know
Yeah.
adverse experiences, and so on and so forth, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think we sort of underestimate, or just I think don't necessarily realize the gravity of, essentially, especially we're talking about like activists who have a social justice bent or approach. I'm sorry, focus. For them, oftentimes they have to have like a very deep understanding of the various like overwhelming social conditions that are related to suffering and oppression. And oftentimes these are conditions that society as a whole often is unable or unwilling to face. So this becomes a burden, I think, weighing on a lot of social justice activists. And what happens is this consciousness tends to increase their level of stress, and it includes like self-inflicted pressure. So they put pressure on themselves to achieve certain goals, make certain changes, but basically to have the impact that they're pursuing. And the challenge is that that sense of responsibility that they feel often pushes them to like prioritize activism over most other aspects of their lives.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I can definitely see how that would be conflicting for them. Something that they feel so passionate about. They're trying to get the message out about whatever that thing is. The burden of these societal conditions weighing heavy on them, causing them to causing there to be increased stress and increased pressure, right? And we know that with increased stress, increased pressure, that tends to age us, right? Have some adverse physical repercussions on our bodies, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's but in addition to that, though, that the we'll I think get into those what those effects are, but part of that too is that when you're part of that type of like really any type of, I think I'm just going to focus mainly on social justice movements. But when you're part of that, oftentimes, even though it takes a toll on activists, it's usually either like dismissed or invalidated. So, and this is by other activists. Because the challenge, and of course, is that this results in this sort of suppressing of concerns that activists may have themselves, or that other people may have about those activists and their well-being. And so, yeah, the challenge there is that with that type of culture present among activists, it then leads them a lot closer to burnout, with specifically what's called activist burnout. And that's something that, again, we don't talk about, especially as a larger Black community. But it's not talked about much in terms of within the activism community either.
Okay, well, let's talk about it. So what does activist burnout look like?
Well, it's multiple symptoms, but essentially it's a state of mental and physical exhaustion resulting from one's social justice efforts. So oftentimes it's a situation where, like, the stress of the work that they're doing becomes so overwhelming, it debilitates their abilities to perform their activism in an effective way. So, and that's in the least, or excuse me, at best. At worst, it results in them having to disengage from their activism. So it can range in terms of severity, but it can result in significant impairment. So, like, some of the signs typically are like insomnia, headaches, again, exhaustion, muscle aches and pains, feeling of despair and like hopelessness, again, feeling overwhelmed, loss of motivation, guilt and worry is very commonplace, anxiousness, disappointment, as well as things like cynicism about what's achievable, and like anger, irritability, loss of meaning. So it there's a lot that can encompass it, and it is similar to sort of like an existential crisis for a lot of activists.
Okay, I'm taking notes.
Okay.
Again, hadn't thought about this, but like you're saying, mental and physical exhaustion, insomnia, headaches, muscle aches and pains, feelings of despair, hopelessness, guilt and worry, disappointment, anger, irritability, loss of appetite. All of that.
All that, exactly.
All of that. Okay.
One of the I think most difficult sort of symptoms there is the guilt, because oftentimes activists feel guilty for taking time away to engage in self-care activities, or especially like experiencing joy while others are suffering. So unfortunately, what that does is that guilt inhibits them from pursuing those types of activities, and eventually they start to neglect their well-being. They push themselves until their bodies unfortunately can no longer handle it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. This is good. I mean, you definitely are heightening my awareness about the care of activists and some of the things that they experience, in this role. And again, just some things that I had never thought of as it relates to that.
Yeah.
As it relates to it. All right. So what are, how, in terms of, you counseling an activist, how do you get them to change their mindset about these things and start taking care of themselves, or not embody some of these thoughts and internalize some of these feelings?
Sure. Yeah. Well, there's a couple of aspects to that. One, part of it is I think being able to understand the sources of commonly experienced stress for activists. There's a researcher named Paul Gorski. He's done some research on activism and burnout, and he identifies like four stressors, and he defines them as sort of like there's an external stressor, there's an internal stressor, there's a in movement stressor. That's probably stressors is certainly more than one, and then the fourth one is he identifies as backlash. And I'll kind of quickly go through those. Like, it's the external stressors. These are like essentially the hostilities that are aimed at activists, and they're enacted by individuals, institutions, and these could include both actual and potential threats. So we're talking harassment, character assassination, of course, even physical violence. And this also is a situation where it could be witnessed, or one is a survivor of it. So one witness that type of hostility towards another activist and still be affected. But these sources are, we're talking police, we're talking from anti-protesters, including in certainly incarceration, in response to protest-related efforts, and retaliation from institutions, whether it's the police, fire, social services, even medical and psychological services, unfortunately. So in terms of those types of stressors, those are the most difficult to have a sense of control over. Internal stressors, basically, these are like our unique characteristics and experiences, as activists that, can cause stress. So that could be like, you want to serve in a particular way. You got maybe some perfectionistic kind of tendencies there. The experience of things like imposter syndrome, upward comparison, is another common challenge. And then sometimes just struggling with the with feelings of despair, maybe guilt, again, response to the magnitude of the change, as well as that resistance to the change. Other attributes are like being overworked, even learning and developing. That can be stressful. So those are some of those examples. In movement stressors, basically, these are the movement and organizational challenges that affect activists and how they relate to each other. So we were talking earlier about that kind of sort of culture there that that's among many movements that suppresses discussion of things like burnout. Well, there's a name for it. It's typically called like a culture of selflessness, or sometimes martyrdom. And basically sacrifice and suffering, those are seen as virtues. So it's a badge of honor in some circles to be close to burnout, unfortunately. In addition to that, there's a pretty much like a conspiracy of silence around burnout. Like, again, it's not talked about. If there are efforts to address burnout, they're usually not systemic, nor do they occur like in a regular fashion. And or those are the first efforts to be discarded, like when time and resources are needed to like address some other issue.
This is really fascinating. I mean, the whole idea of, this culture of selflessness and martyrdom, almost like it's an honor for you to sacrifice your life for this work.
Yeah. It's probably the closest that civilian culture comes to military culture. Where there is, oftentimes, there is that the image and the sort of metaphors of kind of war and battle and being a warrior, being strong. Those are all utilized in service to trying to, inspire activists. And so, there's that idea that you're doing this for other people, and unfortunately, it also means that you have to be willing to sacrifice your well-being to accomplish that goal. Otherwise, your commitment is questioned.
No, that's. I was just actually thinking that it's like, you get challenged in a way such that like you're not really down for the cause, right?
Yeah,
loyalty.
Exactly. So I mean, it's just so that there's the other thing with that too, though, is when we talk about like that culture of selflessness, it is very consistent with what we come to expect in terms of women's gender role identity. So, unfortunately, that means that when we think of women and being nurturing, etc., we bring, I think, that expectation to activism. And so when there's emotional labor that needs to be put in, it's usually not distributed equitably. And oftentimes it does result in women devoting more emotional labor than men.
Interesting. So we have Gian Jones on. She's an occupational therapist, and she just actually got her PhD. So welcome, Dr. Jones. She wants to know, how do we discontinue this self-harming behavior?
It's good question, and there's at least two sort of entry points. I mean, one I think is working with activist organizations in a consultation capacity, where we help them to identify and develop a culture of, I'm just going to call it a culture of care within their organizations. So I think that's one kind of entry point that needs to be institutionalized. And then I think the second point is whatever we can do by way of whether it's individual therapy or psychoeducational approaches, such as workshops. But it's utilizing those types of entry points to start basically helping them to reflect on this culture and how having that badge of honor of burnout is not an act of protest. It's not an act of empowerment. It's not an act of rebellion. And that if anything, it's actually playing right into the hands of basically those who are, the enemies of whatever that particular cause is. So it's reframing. I think starting with kind of reframing, I don't want to use the word self-care, but care, caring for ourselves or taking care of ourselves. Because I think it's like it's more of a long-term type of intervention versus where self-care it's really more, that's more short-term. So it's about institutionalizing again a culture that supports more of those types of efforts as part of being an activist. As part of an activist lifestyle.
Yes. So Janae says it feels like it becomes a battle of who can do the most and do it better. Shouldn't be the case though. It takes the focus off of the impact and places the focus on the person.
Exactly. It's it definitely has an undermining effect. I mean, we've all, we could look at, I'm trying to think, can't think of right now for some reason, I can't think of any recent examples, probably because I've been looking at a lot of like older tapes, but, we can look at, what happened to the Black Panther Party, once many of its leadership were jailed or unfortunately killed, especially like in Chicago, the Chicago chapter. But in addition to that, there were things that were going on in those organizations that resulted in the undermining. There were definitely the FBI, the COINTELPRO counterintelligence program fed into the issues of mistrust that were occurring within the Black Panther Party and between the Black Panthers and other organizations. And I think a lot of that was potentially a result of not just the those types of efforts to undermine, but also just highlighting the emotional stress that folks can be under who are activists, and how that can result in things like mistrusting people who actually are trustworthy. But it's making those types of uninformed decisions, or more, even in some cases, more emotionally driven decisions without having sufficient information. But it's we've got plenty other examples here too, of late, in terms of the effects that have had. We had several after the sort of uprising in Ferguson. We had several activists who were killed, and there are certainly concerns about whether police or other authorities were behind those killings. But the fact is, those types of deaths do, regardless of how it happens, they take a toll.
Right.
You know, they take a toll on activists as well as other members of the community.
Indeed. Okay, so 4 stressors. We talked about external, which really was the one that was kind of heavy on my mind, you know, because really, you know, from my perspective, oftentimes activists are putting themselves in harm's way. You just don't know how people are going to respond from that, with that. So, yeah. And sometimes it's, you know, against the law, whatever it is that they're doing. While it may not, from a, you know, rights or freedom of speech standpoint, it's okay. Sometimes it does cross some other lines. So, so again, you putting yourself in harm's way. So external, internal, in movement, and then backlash. Backlash.
Yeah. And backlash is mainly refers to like, you know, I mean, I pretty much all the actors I know, you know, oftentimes I'm having a thought of In Living Color and their kind of sketches on Black activists at times, but just kind of, you know, there is that sort of stereotype of, you know, sometimes you just can't get them to shut up type thing. You know, it's like they're always talking about the issues, this and this. And the piece there though is, yes, that's how, you know, that reflects how committed they are to their cause. And so they don't just limit oftentimes their efforts to you know, when they're in their role of activism. Oftentimes they bring those in to situations, you know, with family, with work, church or religious experiences, as well as you know, other types of community organizations and groups. And so what can happen in terms of a source of stress is that especially like the most common example I think is probably like job situation where, you know, an activist may bring up you know, try to discuss some issues, for example, related to racism and how it may be showing up at work. And unfortunately, their feedback, their perspective is not welcomed. And they start to consider that maybe their job is in jeopardy. You know, certainly we see this in other ways. I mean, we recently saw that was certainly one of the with the Walmart activists, I think, out of New York, who, you know, were able to unionize there. And, you know, there's been some it's more than, actually, that's not even an example of backlash, because it sounds like in a way maybe direct hostility from Walmart towards them. But, you know, the idea is that outside of their activist activities, they also have to be concerned about how they're going to be received, and essentially where the racist behavior is going to show up. You know, so basically it makes it very difficult to relax. It makes it very difficult to rest.
Yeah.
All
right. Somebody said Amazon.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. My Amazon, or I said Walmart, but yeah, Amazon. Thank you.
Yeah. So backlash is like retaliation.
Yes. It's typically like I said, outside of it's oftentimes not involving the opponents, you know, the direct opponents that an activist maybe protesting against, etc. So it could involve, you know, just occur in a restaurant, you know, so just, it's one of those things where it's like I said, it's a reminder that even though they're activists, they still also experience everyday racism. And we, you may be familiar with the term for that. That's the racial battle fatigue. So that's the sort of a cumulative effect of racism experienced by Black activists, in their everyday lives. So it's that too is taxing,
right?
But that is a major source of burnout. One of the things that before we move past this, though, is that I want to emphasize what seems to be the case is that the stressor having the most impact is actually the in movement stressor. So basically,
why is that?
Because people come with an expectation that they're basically everybody's going to get along. We're all going to work together, and we're going to accomplish, this thing. We're going to make change. We're going to have an impact. And what they realize is, okay, no, it's not that simple. One, there's like infighting. People don't all get along. There are egos involved. People seeking attention. What else? Even and depending on if we're even outside of let's just say kind of Black activist movement, if you're essentially trying to ally with other organizations, there can be challenges there as well, where you have a lot of for example, white activists who they may kind of don more of a white liberal attitude, and as a result become more of an impediment to progress. So they could, certainly most obvious thing is they could hold racist views, but also like they could invalidate justice work of Black activists, even an unwillingness to like step aside and take direction from Black activists. And then there's white fragility, and taking credit for other people's racial justice work. So it's, so many ways that they can have a negative effect on Black activists.
Yeah. So self-love said, yes, ego and childhood traumas come up in leaders too.
Yeah, exactly. When we, the idea is most, especially for Black activists, most people become activists because they experienced some type of significant racism, or something that would, again, kind of fall within sort of an experience of racial battle fatigue earlier in their life. And as a result, the idea of becoming an activist is a form of coping. It's a way of coping with those earlier experiences, as well as, of course, potential future experiences.
Interesting. that activism might be a coping mechanism, right? Hadn't thought about that. So she said, until we address those items, we won't ever see change.
I agree.
So, hiding behind the work. Keisha says, some forget to heal before the fight. Yes. So did we talk Messiah syndrome at all?
Not as much, but we can.
Okay, yeah. So talk a little bit about that. I know we mentioned that when we talked initially. So just
Mhm.
talk to us a little bit about what that is and how that shows up in activists.
Yeah, it's certainly it's this idea that there's of course going to be one person or maybe one organization that is just going to essentially end or have a significant impact at pushing back racism, for example, and white supremacy and dismantling those systemic forms of oppression. And certainly, we have it in our culture. Part of it is, I think, kind of reflecting the Christian tradition and faith, whereas obviously Messiah, but also there's always been that lore, that mythology present that there's going to be that one person, and of course we plenty of examples. We thought it was going to be Dr. King. We thought it was going to be Malcolm X. We are searching for that, and the challenge with believing that type of I'm going to call it really more of a schema, is that I think it again results in activists who believe it placing a lot of pressure on themselves to be the one, be that person. Also, of course, it can if taken to the extremes, it can contribute to kind of more ego-driven conflicts and undermining of efforts, and but definitely it's oftentimes the person who is always looking to get the attention and to appear like they speak for the community. They're oftentimes self-promoting as well. And yeah, unfortunately they do bring a certain amount of confusion and other problems when trying to determine who to listen to, who to believe. Yeah. But obviously the other piece is not lost on me is that it's when we think about the Messiah complex, it's usually a man. That's a image that we oftentimes associate with it. Yeah. And so yes, that puts a lot of pressure on male Black men as activists. But also I think it again kind of can result in some problems in terms of working well with others in the movement.
Okay. Yeah, when I hear that term Messiah complex, I think of the person's feeling like they are the savior and bearing the burden of saving the people from whatever this issue is, and carrying that weight.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Wow. Okay. So, is there hope for the activists? What can we do for them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, folks have already identified, in the chat in terms of like
boundaries.
Some things exactly boundary setting. But I think it's recognizing. So for for Black women, of course, we have the strong Black woman schema, and oftentimes that means they can't allow themselves to feel difficult feelings because that means they'll fall apart, and they can't let themselves fall apart. And oftentimes there's certainly some truth to that, in the sense of like, they're oftentimes holding down multiple roles. They're, you know, they're taking care of family, they're working, and they're an activist. Unfortunately, oftentimes they are, you know, the primary or sole provider, you know, in the family. So that understandably makes sense. The problem is, it gets to a point where they become very susceptible then to burnout as a result. And, you know, and of course, part of that is too, like, you know, it's not, you know, it's also that they are living up to that. They embrace that schema. And so I think the clinically, the idea is helping them to reframe their experiences, basically helping them to honor what they are experiencing, accept limitations that they have, and give themselves permission to focus on their well-being. Yeah. And similarly, there's the angry Black woman stereotype that, you know, and that varies, but yeah, certainly just like the strong Black woman, not every Black woman has adopted that, but yeah, even with the angry Black woman stereotype, like oftentimes you have folks who want to avoid that, and so they are excessively kind of conciliatory, and they can't give themselves permission to experience and express anger. So with them, it's helping them to understand the value of anger, as well as the problems that come with overly suppressing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's balance. You got to let it out.
Yeah. And yeah. Black men also, though, have a similar, you know, John Henryism is still alive and well.
John Henryism.
Yeah. So essentially, that was a concept coined by a Dr. Sherman James, where, if you're familiar with the story of John Henry, talking about a sharecropper who's very hardworking and, you know, certainly dealt with, you know, his kind of social and, of course, health disparities at the time, like other Black men.
He was trying to beat that steam engine, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. He was. And
you don't know nothing about no John Henry. What you talking about, Dr. Mike?
The idea, though, is that yeah, it's and it goes back and forth. Some people see it as a resource. The initial idea is that it's a coping mechanism for managing, like, you know, our sort of prolonged exposure to things like discrimination, and we do that by expending like higher levels of effort, at the cost, though, of our physical and mental health. So if you remember at the end of the story, John Henry, he died.
Right.
You know, he beat the steam engine, but he died.
He did beat the steam engine, but he died. But you know what, Dr. Mike, that something just really clicked with me. I have not heard that term John Henryism, but I'm very familiar with that story. But the thing that clicked with me is that I've often heard my Black brothers and sisters talking about having to be twice as good as their white counterparts. And I just wonder if that kind of came from that.
Yeah. I think it's definitely related. You know, but it's really about, like, okay, how do we successfully achieve you know, economic and other goals in a society that doesn't want us here, and it definitely doesn't want us to succeed. And so, yeah, the idea is like, okay, we have to definitely work harder and harder to get noticed. We have to, whether it's to get that raise or that promotion,
right.
And certainly in there are different industries where it's harder than others, that's for sure. To be noticed and to be treated equitably. But yeah, this is, I mean, it's still present though, and it shows up in activism. It's the, I got to work as hard. I got to do as much as I can, for the cause, for the people. And, it's in some ways it's sort of this sense of like trying to compete with whatever the latest response or latest incident is, and trying to stay out on top and be proactive, not reactive, and but also being all things to all people. And so I think that shows up for Black men as activists in that way. I think that's a reflection of that John Henryism.
So the other thing that I'm hearing too is that it speaks to our value and self-worth. And it doesn't have to. I mean, I know, we are very outcome and data driven in Western society, but there are other ways to win, right? It doesn't have to be the person who, beats the steam engine, right?
Yeah.
Because really, ultimately, you lose.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, you do, and but and it's really, the hard part there is we know that there's a long game to be played here, but that's very difficult when you see people suffering, especially when you're one of those persons suffering.
Yes.
You want to see changes in your lifetime, and as soon as possible. And so it's, I think that pressure can be very challenging to navigate and manage for a lot of people. And so that concept of winning is much more narrowed as a result to like what's the immediate benefit, and understandably there is something to that, because we can see how like sort of a lot of movements kind of go in cycles. So there is only sort of so much kind of shelf life that a particular movement is going to have before it starts to run out of steam, or essentially just it's not getting the sort of same press that it used to get. And then that does affect things like recruiting new people to take over the reins and incorporate into the movement, so you can have that long game being played. So it's
succession planning, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So I one of the questions that I had for this particular conversation, and let me just pause real quick. We're a little bit over the hour, but if Dr. Mike, you can just bear with us a few minutes, as well as our viewers, if you all don't mind. Thoughts around, when I hear of movements, it's oftentimes young people who start movements or are very active in movements. If I think about South Africa during apartheid and during, Nelson Mandela's heyday. When I think of even, the students here, during the civil rights movement in the 60s, and even with Black Lives Matter, and here we have the Dream Defenders here in Tallahassee and in Florida. And so you know, I think as folks mature in the movement, maybe their activism shifts and changes, and so that's another, I think, aspect of this, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And so I'm curious from your perspective, one, having been an activist, during your college years,
mm-hmm,
and also serving activists in terms of being their clinician.
mm-hmm.
Have you seen a great shift or change in activism and what that looks like in movements?
Um, I wouldn't say a great shift. I think there's I think it's actually more of a gradual shift.
Okay.
And definitely it's a combination of things. It's certainly uh, more enthusiasm, more energy and inspiration. There is even especially like a more sophisticated um, sense of understanding um, of the forces being
Mm-hmm.
contended with. I would definitely say, I guess I would say, in terms of like a great shift, certainly is terminology um, uh, shifts, and I think that always occurs, especially with kind of younger generations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do think there's more openness and I think willingness to um, engage with more of the diversity within the Black community. So um, basically, creating spaces for um, LGBTQ persons um, to be present and active in the movement, listening to their voices. I think kind of continue to incorporate, or at least, yeah, I'm going to say incorporate kind of more womanist or feminist
Mm-hmm.
uh, perspectives. Certainly, I think there's more of a willingness as well to follow um, women leaders. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so I think we're seeing that progressiveness occur in as we get kind of younger persons into the movement.
Okay.
Um, and they're the ones that are also, like, I think, calling attention to things like well-being and
Mm-hmm.
self-care. So they're saying, hey, this has got to change. And I think they're having an effect. It's
Mm-hmm.
slow, but yeah, they're definitely having an effect.
I would have to agree, because I think it is the younger generation that is definitely more amenable to or accepting of mental health and wellness. And I actually did a panel on, oh my goodness, I guess that was, wait, what's today? It was yesterday. And all of my panelists, I asked a question around um, something that they've taken up over the pandemic that's been a benefit to them. And 3 out of the 4 said therapy. And one of the comments from one of the viewers was around how it seems like your folks under 40 are more in touch with therapy and counseling and that sort of thing more
Mhm.
than maybe the folks that are over 40. And
Mhm.
so in that's becoming more normalized and more part of the conversation, I think we'll see,
Mhm.
even greater shifts in activism and movements that are more focused on the well-being of the total well-being of the the activists, right?
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's definitely been a missing element that I'm glad that they're pushing for that. You know,
Absolutely.
like you said, it's the whole being, not just.
Indeed. Well, is there anything else that you would have us know about this very interesting topic that, again, had we not had our initial conversation, would not have been anything that I would have thought to taken up, but I'm glad we did. Anything else you want to say in closing?
No, I think, I just think this is an important issue. I think, especially for those therapists who have, are watching or, have a presence, on social media. I would encourage you to reach out to activists, let them know that you are supporting them, especially their emotional well-being, and that you are encouraging them to take care of themselves. And if they need help doing so, yes, encourage them to reach out to you, to other therapists. But I do believe this is in a way, sort of an underserved population, especially the more older ones in particular. So the extent to which we can get them or get in front of them, we may be able to help them with any type of physical, mental health effects that have come from, their serving in our communities in those ways, because they probably, have, experienced some type of, again, medical and psychological effects, and maybe not even know that it could be related to the stress of activism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Ishmael said that yesterday's model has to adapt to be even more effective, less focus on an individual who can be easily eliminated, leaving a movement in a lurch. The approach needs to be more institutionalized. Great
Couldn't
point.
have said it better. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Great point, Ish.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Well, this has been really interesting. So I have enjoyed this conversation tremendously. So thank you so much, Dr. Mike.
Yeah.
Now, while probably at least the viewers that have been chiming in, I know all of them are on the East Coast, but I have to ask, over in Arizona, are you accepting new patients right now?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And so how can folks connect with you?
They can reach out to me through my website, and that's www.mikejohnsonphd.com. Or I'm also on social media, Instagram at Mike J PhD, as well as Facebook.
Okay. MikeJohnsonPhD.com. So if you want to connect with them, there it is. All right. Well, I hope this has been beneficial to you all, our viewers. Thank you for your engagement tonight. Again, this was not something that I would have thought to talk about, but I'm glad we did. And so please tag your activist friends, family members, what have you, and tell them that they need to watch this conversation. Let's keep this conversation going. I invite those of you who have not subscribed to the Conversations YouTube channel to please do so. Subscribing is supporting, and we can use all the support we can get. So we have a few people that are saying great insights tonight. Thank you, Ozzy, for being on here. Miss Maya said, very great conversation. Thank you. Thank you. Self Love said this was everything. So Self Love is an activist, okay? Warrior mother. She has a group called Melanin Mothers Meet. And so she's all about
Great.
Black and brown mamas.
Great.
And helping them with their babies. So
Yeah.
and Miss Marion great show. So thank you for being on here. So self-love is saying, oh dear, LOL. Yes, I'm calling you out. I'm calling you out. All right. All right. Well, again, Dr. Mike, I so appreciate your time, and you definitely have to come back on really soon, and let's have more of a conversation because I'm interested in getting into some of those therapeutic modalities or techniques that I listed in your bio. So I want you to talk about some of those in the near future. All right.
Great. Yeah, sure will.
All
Be glad to
right.
come back. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, good people. We will see y'all next time. Have a great rest of the week. Oh, wait, before we go, I gotta just mention real quick Solar Southside Festival, SOSFestTLH.com. Please go. That's what I'll be doing for the next 3 days. So check it out, SOSFestTLH.com. We have a whole host of activities taking place for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. All right. See y'all later.